The winter wind carries no memory of them. No statue bears their name, no grave weeps for their bones. All that remains is a silence. Wide as a steppe, and just as cold, once. Their riders thundered across the desert, like a storm sent by the gods. Once, they looked eastward and saw nothing to fear, not even the rising shadow of a man whose fury would tear empires apart. They called themselves the Khwarezmian Empire. Heirs to Persia, rulers of golden cities, merchants of silk and spice. Their marketplaces sang with languages, from Delhi to Damascus. Their palaces glittered with stolen brilliance. And when a foreign envoy arrived, ragged, respectful, offering trade, they burned his beard, murdered his men, and spat in the face of the most dangerous man alive. That man was Genghis Khan, and what followed was not war. It was annihilation. Over the course of just a few years, an empire that had stood for centuries was erased from the map. Cities became ash, rivers ran red. Women, children, priests, all fell under the wrath of a vengeance so methodical. It became myth, but this is no myth. This is not the tale of a barbarian versus civilization. This is the true story of an empire that insulted a man who had reshaped the world and paid for it with its existence. Today, we pull back the veil of legend. We walk among the corpses of power and pride, and we ask, what does it cost to provoke a man who believes he is destiny itself? The city didn't sleep. It murmured, Bakara breathed in silk and exhaled incense. The streets were strung with gold thread banners that caught the morning light like knives unsheathed. Water trickled from fountains carved by forgotten hands. Perfumed traders whispered prices in 10 languages. Beneath every slippered footstep, the cobblestones bore the memory of empires long turned to sand. Above them all sat the throne of Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, raised not on merit, but inheritance. Wrapped in brocade, drowning in scrolls, he reigned behind latticed walls and mirrored halls where truth arrived filtered and bent. He ruled an empire draped in velvet, but lined with thorns. Samarkand glittered under his gaze, not as a jewel, but as a trophy. Its minarets pierced the sky with ambition. Markets overflowed with Persian manuscripts, Chinese lacquer, Indian gems. There were eunuchs who sang in falsetto at court, and poets who bled beauty into verse for coin. The empire shimmered, and so it believed it was eternal. But paradise has its price. Behind every silk curtain stood a servant who listened. Behind every envoy's smile, a suspicion. The Shah trusted no one, not his generals, not his advisors, not even his own sons. He dismissed warnings with a flick of the hand, as if power made him invulnerable to consequence. And yet, he listened. For betrayal in every footstep, those who spoke too plainly vanished. Those who rose too quickly fell harder. Loyalty was not rewarded, it was required, like breath. Cities could rise or burn at the flick of his quill. One by one, the arteries of his empire began to clot. Governors taxed with cruelty. Soldiers paid in promises, justice delayed and renamed. Still, the surface held, Nishapur hummed with scholars, who debated stars while the ground beneath them cracked. Bureaucrats spun silk from paper. Spies whispered through mosque walls. And the people bowed not out of reverence, but exhaustion. The Shah saw threats everywhere, except in his own reflection. To insult him was to vanish. To oppose him was to feed crows. His power was brittle, but blinding like a polished blade left too long in the sun. And like all rulers who mistake silence for love, he believed obedience meant peace. But far to the east, beyond the mountains and deserts, beyond maps and imagination, a storm was forming, not of clouds, but of hooves. It moved without heralds, without flags, without mercy, and when it arrived, it would not knock. But here, inside this mirrored palace, surrounded by velvet and venom, Shah ad-Din believed in walls. He believed in coins and names and the permanence of thrones. He did not yet know that empires do not fall when they are weak. They fall when they believe they cannot, and by the time he heard the thunder, it would already be inside his gates. The steppe taught him silence, not the silence of peace, but of hunger, of wind moving over unmarked graves, of mothers burying sons beneath ice without weeping. That silence lived in him. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was just a boy named Temujin, skin chapped from wind, wrists bound in rope, watching his father's allies abandon them like dogs with no master. He learned that kinship could starve you. That trust was the first thing stolen when the horses fled. And so he buried that boy, not with earth, but with fire. The grasslands do not forgive. There, names are temporary, homes are smoke, and loyalty is traded like salt. But vengeance is the only inheritance that lasts. He grew into the kind of man who didn't shout. He remembered. He watched. He waited. While others drank wine from gold and called themselves civilized, he carved alliances into flesh and oath. He united the tribes with iron and vision, not rhetoric. Where others saw disobedience, he saw a pattern of fear, and he learned how to break it. The man they called barbarian moved like a surgeon through chaos. He spoke few words. His punishments were measured. His victories were not indulgence. They were instruments. Temples burned because lessons needed teaching. Cities fell not for pleasure, but for prophecy. He believed the sky had chosen him, not as a king, but as a correction. And still, he waited, even at the height of his triumph, when the steppes were his and fear rippled before him like grass in the wind. He did not roar. He offered peace. He sent envoys, not armies. He wanted to trade, not destroy. He extended the hand first, but he remembered the taste of rope on his wrist. He remembered the boy. So when news came, a merchant caravan seized, his messengers humiliated, his men executed and tossed into dust, he did not scream. He sat. He blinked. He whispered to his generals not of war, but of justice, because he knew something the Shah did not. The Khan did not threaten. He promised. He had not crossed mountains to be mocked. He had not bled to unify a people just to be dismissed by silk-robed fools who thought letters and palaces made them immortal. He knew better. He knew that when pride blinds an empire, it makes a sound, a sharp, metallic sound, like a sword, slowly being unsheathed. And far in the east, the blade was already drawn. The wind on the steppe shifted, the horses stirred, the silence broke. And somewhere in the heart of the world, death began walking west, not with noise, not with fire, but with memory. They came with no weapons, no banners, no threats, no drums of war. Just horses dusted in road fatigue and satchels of coin, bolts of felt, spices wrapped in parchment, and scrolls sealed in wax. Their language was careful, clipped, shaped by the wind and silence of the east. Their hands open, not clenched, 3 men. Messengers, not soldiers. Carriers of peace, not conquest, and still they were watched like wolves. Otrar's gates did not creak open in welcome. They groaned as if burdened by what was about to happen. The governor, Enalhuk, sat behind polished wood and curtains, thick enough to muffle screams. He saw no honor in dust-covered diplomats. He saw only strangers who bowed too little, whose tongues bore no flattery, whose eyes did not lower fast enough. Their scrolls promised trade. Their tone asked for trust. Their gifts glittered, but not enough. Somewhere behind his eyes, something cold and petty blinked. And so he made a decision. He called them spies. The accusation did not come with questions. It came with shackles. The caravan was seized. The merchants were dragged into side alleys, where the laws did not reach. Some were stripped. Some were flayed. Some were left half alive and wholly silent, and the envoys, those few still breathing, were bound and spat upon. One had his beard burned off in front of a jeering court. He did not scream. He simply stared as his skin blistered and the stink of scorched hair filled the hall like incense made from hate. The court laughed. This was not a declaration of war. It was worse. It was mockery. When word reached the Shah, he did not punish. In Al-Huk, he praised him. He believed this would teach the Eastern horseman his place. He believed that arrogance wrapped in silk would protect him. He did not understand the depth of what he had shattered. Among all the sins that thread through empires, betrayal, excess, cruelty, there is one so old, it is carved into the bones of every fallen kingdom. The breaking of sacred trust. Envoys are not men. They are vessels. They carry not their own lives, but the honor of two worlds briefly reaching toward one another. To harm them is not strategy. It is heresy, and far to the east, Genghis Khan did not shout. He listened. As each detail arrived, the theft, the humiliation, the blood, he did not move. But something inside him uncoiled, slow as a snake beneath frost. He sent a second mission, 3 more men. 1 Muslim, 1 Mongol, 1 unknown. Their message was simple: return. The governor, honor the dead, admit the wrong. Only 1 came back. The others were murdered. The survivor returned beheaded, his skull sealed with tar, his face left intact, his mouth frozen mid-plea. The Khan did not send a 3rd mission. He no longer believed in words. A world had ended, not one built of wood or marble, but of breath and ritual and invisible lines not meant to be crossed. The Khwarezmians had not insulted a man. They had torn open the skin of diplomacy and laughed at its bleeding. The wind shifted. The silence cracked, and in the cold space where peace once stood, a voice whispered, not with rage, but certainty: burn everything. It began with hooves, not thunderous at first, but distant, rhythmic, measured, like a pulse beneath the earth. Then the snow cracked. They came over the mountains with breath like smoke and eyes that did not blink. Through passes no sane army would dare. Ice clung to their armor. Blood froze in the beards of their scouts. Their horses moved as one, disciplined and silent, as if born from the wind itself. The Shah had expected hesitation, delay, negotiation. What he received was speed. Otrar was the first to fall. The very place where arrogance had burned a beard and mocked a god. The Mongols made no speeches. They surrounded the city like wolves in cold grass. Siege engines rose like wooden altars. The defenders stared through slitted walls and whispered that death had no face. When the city gates finally broke, mercy did not enter. The governor Al-Huk, the man who once laughed as skin blistered, was dragged through the streets like waste. He was bound, mocked, and executed with such methodical creativity that even those loyal to the Khan averted their eyes. It was not revenge. It was instruction. 1 city. 1 message. Then came Bukhara. The call to prayer never finished. Smoke rose. Before sunrise, temples cracked like bones. The people hid behind doors that offered no resistance. When the Mongols entered the Grand Mosque, they did not desecrate it. They stood in silence, then climbed the pulpit. And the Khan, that wind-burned man of few words, spoke only this: if you had not committed great sins, your God would not have sent me. It was not cruelty. It was calculus. Samarkand tried to resist. Their walls were high. Their pride higher. They believed their legacy would hold. They believed art could protect them. But art does not stop fire. The siege was not only military, it was psychological. Corpses were flung over walls, not just for disease, but despair. Deserters were allowed to flee so they could speak, so they could shake in marketplaces and whisper, "They are not men. They are a silence that devours." The Shah, far from the front, issued commands no one followed. His generals argued. His soldiers bled. His people waited for forgiveness from a man who believed his crown would defend itself. There was no pattern to the terror, no mercy to the surrender. Cities that yielded were sometimes spared, sometimes flayed. Cities that fought were reduced to ashes or erased completely. There was no map that could predict it. That was the point. You could not reason with the storm. The Mongols moved like ink in water, staining everything. They did not conquer. They dismantled. They did not occupy. They obliterated. Children learned to stop crying. Mothers taught silence. Like prayer, the streets forgot how laughter sounded, and behind every blackened ruin, a whisper remained. We brought this upon ourselves. The Khwarezmian Empire, once stretched across deserts and silk roads, now stretched only across graveyards and smoke. No one knew how many had died. No one counted. The rivers carried too many names, and still the storm moved. It did not celebrate. It did not pause. It simply advanced, because punishment was not complete, because the man who once offered trade had been refused, because the boy with rope-burned wrists had not yet finished writing his answer. It was a quiet defiance. Nishapur did not scream when the Mongols arrived. Its gates held. Its soldiers stood. The call to arms echoed through alleys draped in drying laundry, past prayer rugs still warm from morning knees. Mothers clutched there. Sons, not because they believed they would win, but because surrender no longer meant survival. They remembered Samarkand, so they fought, and for a brief, flickering moment, they believed resistance might matter. The streets filled with smoke and steel. Arrows fell like wasps. Walls trembled but stood. For days, the city did not die. It bled, but then a man fell, not just any man. A husband, a prince. A tether to the Khan's blood, he was Genghis's son-in-law, a warrior with a name that mattered. And when it was spoken in past tense, something inside the Khan shifted, not rage. Something colder. He did not mourn. He calculated. He stood over a map, not of paper, but memory. And where Nishapur's name once sat, he scratched bone-deep silence. He issued no proclamation. The soldiers did not cheer. They moved with ritual. With purpose, the gates fell. And behind them, a city waiting for judgment. It came in hours, not days. First the men, then the boys, then the women, then the children, then the dogs, then the cats, then anything with breath and eyes and heartbeat. No plea was heard, no exception granted. Grain was spared. Names were not. The Mongols moved door to door like smoke with knives. The wells filled with limbs. The rooftops collapsed from the weight of stacked corpses. Even the silence was choked. Some say 100,000. Others say more. It doesn't matter. Numbers cannot hold screams. When it was finished, they salted the earth with memory. Not to destroy life, but to make it linger, and somewhere. In the rubble, someone etched a name, the prince's name, as if to say, this was not senseless. This was an equation. One death owed one city. This was not a massacre. It was a message to the next city, to the next king, to the next trembling boy holding a spear with hands that shake. The lesson was written in blood in the ancient script of fear. You may fight, but you will not be remembered. And so, Nishapur vanished, not in fire, but in subtraction. Its songs forgotten, its bones unburied, its children erased before they had time to sin, even the dogs, not because they posed a threat, but because mercy, once broken, must not be mistaken for a door that swings both ways. And as the soldiers marched out, boots red, faces blank. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered. The math was complete. The blood had balanced the ledger. But far ahead, other cities still stood. Other names still waited to be taught what numbers meant. A crown did not fall. It withered. He did not leave the capital in triumph or ceremony. He slipped out at night, swaddled not in silk but in sweat, a trembling figure behind veils and guards who no longer saluted. The wind no longer bowed to him. The stars no longer spoke his name. Even the horses resisted. He rode not as a sovereign, but as a fugitive, city to city, citadel to citadel. Each promised shelter, then silence. Allies turned away. Gates that once opened on command now stayed shut until the dust settled. Servants left food and fled. Nobles feigned illness. No one wanted to be the last to kneel beside a man already sinking in his hands. He still clutched scrolls with seals and signatures, the ink of a world that no longer existed. He muttered to them like prayers. They did not answer. At every new resting place, he awoke to fewer voices. The guards thinned. The corridors quieted. He began to dress himself, then to carry his own saddle. At night, he would trace the lines of maps that had betrayed him. His fingers shook. His lips cracked. He stopped speaking the name of his empire. In the end, he found a sliver of sand, a spit of land in the Caspian Sea, small enough to be ignored, distant enough to feel like purgatory. There, the salt air peeled the titles from his tongue. He stared at the horizon for hours, but no ships came, only birds. And they did not kneel. He died without witness. No crown, no farewell, no sword placed beside his body. Only the sound of eyes, water licking the shore like a tongue tasting regret. They say his son buried him with his own hands, that no prayer was spoken, that even the earth hesitated before opening, and the name that once made governors tremble and poets rise faded before the flesh. No coins bore it, no minarets repeated it, no child whispered it into future centuries. A Shah must believe in permanence. But when power rots, it does not crash. It evaporates, and by the time the wind moved again, there was nothing left to scatter but dust. The mountains did not speak, but they listened. They listened as a prince rode through their narrow throats, soaked in sweat, stripped of sleep, eyes bruised with the weight of 1,000 dead cities. He was not his father. Jalal al-Din had no illusions of permanence. His crown was made of grief. The empire had already died behind him. He rode not toward victory, but away from memory. And yet, he fought. He gathered what was left, ragged swords, fractured loyalties, soldiers who still believed in something more than survival. They moved through ravines like ghosts clinging to breath. Every hill he climbed was a prayer carved in bruised bone. His banner, once sewn by courtly hands, now dragged through thorns, torn and blood-darkened. Still, he refused to kneel. In the valleys, they said he fought like a man who had already seen the end, and chose to charge toward it anyway. Each ambush, precise, each retreat, bitter, each victory brief. But no mountain can outrun the sky. When the Mongols caught up with him by the banks of the Indus, it was not a battle. It was a requiem. The water shimmered with the heat of dying breath. Horses screamed into mud. Arrows sang over prayer. The river watched without blinking. He did not beg. He did not break. His blade found flesh. His voice held, but courage is not armor. It delays, but it does not undo. They say he leapt from the cliff when the last of his men were swallowed, that he vanished into the gorge like smoke into wind, that the Mongols did not find his body, that somewhere, far beyond the line of memory, he lived a little longer, a whisper, a wound, but the land he fought for was gone. The people he carried were ash. There would be no kingdom rebuilt from honor, no flag risen by virtue, no tale where bravery bent history's hand. He was a prince without pages, a warrior in a war already lost. And though he fought with fire in his blood, he fought beneath a sky that had already chosen silence. Even lions, when surrounded by ghosts, must learn to run. The ink dried before anyone could read it. On the old maps, the Khwarezmian Empire was a shape, wide, jagged, confident. A sweep of names scrawled in calligraphy too bold to doubt. Rivers curled like veins across its heart. Cities glinted like coins pressed into parchment. And then, one by one, the names went silent. The empire did not fall in battle. It was not overthrown. It was unwritten. The Mongols did not install governors. They installed ghosts. They did not raise flags. They erased borders. The places that once whispered with prayers and trade and silk-footed messengers now sagged in wind. Ash coated the streets like memory turned to dust. Nothing was rebuilt. No monument was raised. The survivors walked away slowly, heads bowed. Not in grief, but in disbelief that anything had ever stood there at all. Not in court records, the cities vanished. In merchant ledgers, the routes were skipped. Even the birds forgot the roofs. The children of Khwarezm were absorbed into other tongues, other robes, other gods. No one returned. No one reclaimed the ruins. Names were changed, histories redrafted, stones reused for other empires. The blood was rinsed clean by time. There was no trial, no treaty, no final trumpet, just a slow silence that deepened year by year until the empire was less than a memory. It became a question no one asked, and those who did remember it, remembered. In fragments, in warnings, in cautionary tales told to wide-eyed boys beside fading hearths. Do not provoke the one who carries the sky on his shoulders. Do not mock the man with nothing left to lose. The Khwarezmians had palaces. They had seals, scrolls, scholars, silk, silver. But they had one flaw. They believed history could not forget them. But history does forget. Not like fire, like wind. Gentle clearing of the table. A slow, soft wiping of the slate. Not with vengeance. With quiet, and so the empire died not in flames, but in dust. It did not collapse. It dissolved, and in the space where it once stood, only this remained. The smell of smoke, the curve of a broken wall, and the echo of a name no longer spoken. There are wounds that do not bleed, not at first. The death of the Khwarezmian Empire did not send shockwaves. It whispered. It left no center to mourn, no capital to occupy, no heir to chase the past. Only 1,000 absences that spread across. Deserts, earned across ledgers, bled across tongues. But somewhere, in the silence after ash, a question still hung. Why? Why such fury? Why such completeness? To answer, that is to misunderstand the man who rode east to west not for gold, not for conquest, but for equilibrium. Genghis Khan was not merely punishing insult. He was correcting imbalance. He believed, in the symmetry of pain, that for every broken envoy, a city must fall. That for every mockery of diplomacy, the mouth that mocked must be filled with dust. He was not wrathful. He was precise, and in that precision lay the horror. He called himself the instrument of the eternal blue sky, not king, not god, not tyrant, just a vessel. When others built empires for glory, he built absence for meaning. When others carved their names into stone, he carved silence into geography. To provoke such a man was not to offend a warrior, it was to challenge the will of thee. Wind, and yet the world learned the wrong lesson. They saw a barbarian unleashed, a destroyer, a flame. They did not see the ritual beneath the ruin, the way his vengeance followed laws of its own, laws older than kings, laws written not in books, But in bone, the Khwarezmians had broken something sacred, the trust between mouths and messages. Between two men who do not love each other, but agree not to slit throats in daylight. When they killed the envoys, they did not just insult a man, they tore a hole in the world. And the response was not just retaliation, it was restoration. But restoration at that scale is indistinguishable from annihilation. Today, no monument weeps for the lost empire. No echo of their tongue stirs in market squares. The dust settled where palaces once towered, and Genghis Khan, that man of silence and storm, moved on. He left no garrisons, no boast, just emptiness. And a warning carved in what was no longer there. Do not confuse peace with permanence. Do not mistake diplomacy for weakness, and never, ever provoke the sky, because the sky does not forget, it watches, it listens, it waits, and when it finally answers, it does not argue, it erases.